They said the desert buried him and his secret with him, but a diary pulled from a cave in the red center whispered of a gold reef so vast it could rewrite a nation's fortunes if only anyone could find it again. One prospector swore he stood on that reef, a ribbon of gold bigger than legend itself, yet he died before marking the map, leaving only directions that lead into heat, shimmer, and silence. The outback has always lured with distance and scale, ranges folded like rusted corrugations, sandy plains that reset the compass at every sunrise. In that immensity, rumors become landmarks, and into this theater walked a man with a memory, a claim, and a deadline written in the desert's unforgiving calendar. Harold Bell Lassiter knew the shape of a promise that could pull money from wallets and men from cities, a continuous gold-bearing quartz reef, somewhere west of Alice Springs, beyond country that breaks machines and men. He spoke with the precision of someone who had seen something and carried it like a hot coal for decades, telling and retelling the sighting in different years of his life, as if time itself blurred the edges of truth without dimming its brightness. He wrote letters, pitched movers and ministers, placed his reputation on a seam he said ran like a buried lightning strike across central Australia. If he was right, the reef would dwarf the old fields. In a nation clawing through hard years, that glimmer sounded like salvation. The expedition that formed around him looked good on the ledger. Trucks, a pilot, men who had seen too many miles to be easy marks. But there's a point in that country where good equipment becomes a suggestion, not a guarantee. Engines labored, tires sank, bearings burned. The map buckled under the weight of dunes and distance. Sun hammered decisions thin, disagreements sharpened in the glare. Trust the guide or trust the geology, the memory or the compass, the man or the land. They split, the machines went one way. Lassiter took camels and a hard-bitten dingo shooter named Paul Johns into a sea where dunes were waves and silence was sound. Camel country slows everything to a heartbeat. Leather creaks, sand grinds. The horizon moves an inch at a time and then not at all. Out there, Lassiter said he found it again. He said the reef was there, right there, gold locked in quartz like morning light in ice. But he would not or could not bring another man to the exact scarring stone that would turn his certainty into proof. He spoke to the land like an old friend whose face he couldn't quite place, and the land as usual said nothing back. Tempers frayed, then snapped. Johns left. The partnership dissolved into heat and grit, and the story narrowed to one man, one conviction, and a desert that does not bargain. What carries forward from that fork in the track is a body and a diary. A bushman found them long after hope had thinned to rumor Lassiter gone, and his notebook tucked away from wind and eyes. The entries sounded like a man negotiating with time, mapping in phrases rather than coordinates, pointing with memory rather than instruments. They told of a rediscovery, of landmarks that ring like proper nouns to those who know the center, of a promise he believed he had kept even as the desert closed its fist around him. Those pages became the ember people have blown on ever since. Some read proof, others read delusion, all read hunger. From there the country fills with ghosts in broad daylight, expeditions multiplying in the wake of grief. Planes and camels and boots triangulating between rock holes and ranges, each team hoping to be the one to turn myth back into or the landscape absorbs their footsteps without a mark. Maps of the search area look like spiderwebs, threads gathered to nodes that never quite align. One set of arguments says the ground where Lassiter pointed doesn't host the kind of geology that would hold a single continuous fabulously rich reef. Another set counters that the belt is complicated enough to hide what textbooks might miss, that structure and heat and time can write secrets between lines even a geologist needs years to learn to read. Meanwhile, rumors grow their own roots. Old-timers talk about quartz ridges a man could balance a life upon. Assy whispers that run hot and then cold, aerial glimpses that become stories that become waypoints. Every few years another claim rises. Someone who thinks the coordinates were reversed, someone who swears a bearing was written like a riddle, someone who believes the reef lies east where west was said or south where north was assumed. Each theory has its maps and its marks, its evidence and its leaps. Each one asks the same thing of the listener: choose whether to trust the land as silence or a dead man's conviction. There is the believer's version. The center is vast enough to hide a line of gold and rugged enough to erase footprints by noon. If a prospector with a head full of landmarks could walk back into that reef once, he could fail to lead a party back there later. Pride, paranoia, imprecise instruments, even a simple desire to keep them exact spot close to the chest until terms were better. The believer imagines Lassiter standing on rock humming with value, placing a hand on stone that hums like a hive, and promising to return with the papers and machines that would finally turn belief into bullion. In that telling, his death is not the end of the story, only the reason the land still keeps the secret. There is the skeptics version. The reef as described is a mirage born of need. In the heat of the depression and the meantime between fortunes, a story can gain weight from the hunger of the listeners as much as the certainty of the teller. Geology is not an opinion. The belts where such reefs form do not move to meet a man's faith. The diary's ambiguities are not codes, just the handwriting of a man too long. In the sun, triangulating with points of reference that shift with every step. In that telling, the desert did not conspire to hide a treasure, only to show a limit, but mysteries feed on friction. The more the two versions push against each other, the more sparks land in dry grass. The region's place names become incantations. A line of hills is read like scripture. An old plane's flight log becomes a breadcrumb. A single assay report, stripped of context, turns into a chorus. Arguments blossom over minutes on a watch decades ago, over the meaning of a gesture in a pilot's recollection, over whether a letter references one journey or two, one formation or many, one truth or a braided rope of smaller truths. The myth expands by what cannot be disproven and is sustained by what has not been shown. Imagine the last days with the sound turned low, heat presses down, the wind moves nothing, the map in the head is louder than the map in the hand. There is still enough in the canteen to stay one day more, and then one more. There is still enough strength for one more ridge, one more bluff that looks like the one from before, one more quartz outcrop that might be the edge of a promise. Conviction is a gift until it becomes an anchor. By the time help is a day too far, belief is the only water left to drink. The diary entries shift from plans to remnants to a kind of future tense where a return is assumed. The land answers in the only language it has, weather, distance, night. After Lassiter, the search becomes a mirror held up to the people doing the searching. Some arrive with coils and detectors, chasing glints that turn out to be bottle caps and bullets and the occasional nugget that shouts in the headphones like a benediction. Some arrive with archives, placing letters against maps like overlays and pulling meaning from contradictions that refuse to settle. Some arrive with instruments that read the earth in signals no eye can see. All of them feel the same thing at dusk, when the color drains out of the rock and the temperature falls like a curtain. A closeness to an answer, or to a question that has learned to imitate one. There are practical costs that grind alongside the romance, money spent on fuel and flights, friendships frayed by heat and hope, machines shaken to pieces by corrugations and creek beds that turn into traps. There are moments of grace, a waterhole holding just enough, a night sky so dense with stars it feels like the ground has fallen away, a sudden breeze that erases Adunia's footsteps and with them the sense of having come from anywhere at all. In those moments, the reef feels inevitable. In the morning, with the FLIs and the sun back in place, inevitability feels like a story told to get through the night. Some swear the clues align near ranges whose names taste like iron. Others argue the whole search is a shadow cast by unreliable memory and the gold fever of hard times. There are whispers that the directions were deliberately muddled, a prospector's trick as old as prospecting, a reciprocal bearing meant to keep rivals running the wrong way while the right way stayed safe in a head that would always come back. There are suggestions that the reef is not a single body at all, but a patchwork of smaller lodes and veins mistaken for a continuous seam in the tint and thrill of a first sighting. The most unsettling possibility is that multiple small truths have been mistaken for one great one, and the forgotten mind is a composite creature made of discovery and error and echo. Yet the story endures, and endurance is its own kind of proof of appetite, of imagination, of the way a landscape can become a character that withholds and reveals in equal measure. The center does not need a map to be itself. It holds secrets without malice. The human part of the tale is what stings. A man who believed he had his hands on a fortune. A group of companions who watched belief separate from evidence, a ledger of promises made to investors and families and himself. The diary sits in that gap, alive with a voice no longer here to answer questions, stubborn as a landmark. By the time the sun leans westward on any given search, a familiar clock starts ticking. Stay and risk running short. Leave and risk missing the thing that brought everyone there. The outback is full of these clocks. They run on water, on shade, on spare parts, on nerve. The people who chase after Lassiter's shadow learn to live with the ticking, to hear it as part of the music. Some come home with stories that feel like gold until they are told. Some come home with small stones heavy in the pocket and heavier in the telling. Some don't quite come home at all, but live instead in that bright line where certainty might have been, and still the question refuses to be settled. If the reef exists, the land will mark it in structure, in mineralization, in the code language of course, and sections and asses. If it does not, the myth will still tell truths about hardship and hope and the lengths people travel for a horizon that keeps moving. The forgotten Australian gold mine remains what the desert made it, a mirage that might not be a mirage, a promise that continues to recruit new believers, and a warning that even the clearest memory can go missing in a country built from distance. Somewhere out there, a ridge throws a shadow in late afternoon that looks for a breath, like the edge of a reef that could change everything. Somewhere else, a prospector hums at a campfire and draws a line in the sand with a stick the way a man might draw a map when he knows a story is the only thing that will get him there. Tomorrow, the search will begin again. New tracks will crease old dunes. Someone will unfold a map softened by years of folding. Someone will quote a sentence from a dead man's pages like a prayer. And the land, patient as always, will wait, holding whatever it holds, saying only what the wind says across stone that remembers more than it reveals. At dusk in the center, shadows lengthen like explanations. Ranges become ribs under a red sky. This is the hour when quiet men roll maps back open and set belief beside evidence, like two strangers asked to share a table. The forgotten gold mine has already taken its toll money, machines, a man, and still the country hums with the question. It keeps refusing to answer. If the reef is there, the land will mark it. If it isn't, the land has already answered. People just don't like what it said. Begin with first principles. Rocks are a record. The belts that hold gold tell the story in their structure. Faults like scars, quartz veins like stitches, ironstone capping like dried blood. In classrooms, the map of Central Australia looks orderly. On the ground, the same map folds into confusion. Hills hard as old anvil, creek beds that run only in memory, dunes that practice forgetfulness. The promise of a 7-mile reef sounds like a trumpet in a quiet hall. Out here, the music is the slow, patient rhythm of orogenic time, where gold is made by heat and pressure and carried by fluids that choose their paths without consulting rumor. Now set the science against the story. The story says, a young prospector saw a fabled line of gold and could never quite bring a second pair of eyes to it. Years later, he set out in engines and returned to camels, set out with men and returned alone, set out with coordinates and returned with a diary. The science says, show the shear zones, the fold hinges, the host lithologies. Show the asses and the sections, the continuity of grade along strike. The story answers with landmarks spoken like passwords. The science asks for a core. Consider the trick of direction. Anyone who has hidden something in the bush knows how to speak in mirrors. A reverse bearing, a swapped compass point, a degree shaved from a line that you then follow as if it were true. The human mind loves a riddle because a riddle is a promise with a built-in delay. Some who have chased the reef believe the delay is deliberate. The landmarks fit, they say, but only if the directions are flipped the way an old hand would protect a fortune until he could carry the paperwork in one hand and a revolver in the other. Others say there's no code at all, only the warping of memory under heat and need. Both explanations, in their own way, respect the desert, bring in the witnesses, because every legend acquires a small courtroom of voices. There is the pilot who flew search patterns and heard a man speak of ranges like he was naming cousins. There's the bushman who found a cave, a diary, and the sick certainty that someone had stayed too long where the map runs out of mercy. There are later adventurers who walked the same lines with better boots, and historians who laid letters over letters like translucent sheets until the contradictions began to look like an atlas. One will tell of a quartz ridge that rang under hammer. Another will talk about pyrite that deceives in certain lights. A geologist will lift a sample and say, this sings of heat but not of wealth. A prospector will hold the same rock and hear a different song. It helps to stand at the cave in the hour when the light softens and the rocks lose their hard edges. The opening isn't grand. It is an indentation the way regret is an indentation in a life. Shallow but inescapable. A man sheltered here for weeks during a summer that burnt like a fuse. He wrote what he could. He marked the days as if numbering them might anchor him to the present. He thought of water as a plan. He believed that the reef he had touched, or dreamed of touching, or convinced himself he had touched, was close enough to describe but just beyond the line he could walk. He chose to leave. He believed he could cross the distance. Between salvation and a rendezvous, he misjudged the desert in its usual way, made no comment beyond the cave. The tracks of the story fan outward. Some point toward ranges that look like broken teeth, where ancient forces could have shot fluids through cracks and left a signature worth more than a government budget. Others veer into country where the same forces hardened rock into stubborn silence. People have flown LiDAR and satellites, hauled magnetometers across country, sifted archives until the paper bled anecdotes. The most sober reports pour cold water on the idea of an uninterrupted, fabulously rich seam running like a golden highway. The most ardent counter that absence of proof is not proof of absence, especially in a place that eats proof for breakfast and leaves no crumbs. Pause here for the human calculus. In the shadow of promising ranges, partnerships fray. One person trusts the gut, the other the grid. Budgets slip, radios fail, maps blow away and are retrieved and then no longer quite trusted, the way people retrieve and no longer quite trust their courage. Someone makes the case to push one dune further in the last hour of daylight. Someone else measures water and shade and says no. These arguments play the same notes year after year, generation after generation, as if the desert had written the score and hands it out to any band willing to perform. And still, there are those small miracles that keep everyone in the game. A detector barks in a wash and gives up a chevron of metal, not a fortune, but the kind of gleam that turns hands into fists and plans into vows. A paper resurfaces with a margin note that seems for a beat too narrow, an entire map to a fingertip. A geophysical anomaly aligns with a story told by someone whose face no one can quite remember. Each becomes a lead. Each burns itself out or cools to a coal that waits for a later breath. The land has its own memory. It remembers pressure and uplift, years with water and years without. It remembers feet and tires and hooves, but only as stress on a skin that grew old before maps were imagined. It keeps gold if it keeps gold. In places that make structural sense, it does not honor a prospector's need over a metamorphic history. It is at peace being beautiful and indifferent to the human eye. This looks like mystery. To the land, it is just being land. So what can be said without cheating? That a man believed, that belief took him past the reasonable brink, that the record he left is precise in feeling and imprecise in a way that allows any reader to project a compass where a confession should be, that the geology of the broad region allows for gold, but not easily the kind of continuous high-grade ribbon the story insists upon, that practical searches, from camel trains to aerial surveys, have failed to deliver the reef into daylight, that people nevertheless wake up before dawn to try again. In the small hours, the argument about truth stops being a fight and becomes a threshold. Either the reef exists and is cleverly hidden by distance and by the misdirections baked into a few well-placed lines, or it does not, and the story is the treasure that keeps delivering a return. The first option keeps boots on the ground, the second keeps the culture fed. Both keep the desert company. Choose one and the other does not disappear. It just walks a few paces behind, shaking its head. If there is a code, it is likely simple, not an anagram of bearings and riddles about stars, but a habit. Turn a memory inside out to protect an edge. Round a number up when water was low. Mirror a direction when speaking to a man not yet trusted. If there is no code, then the shape of the diary is the shape of heat on the mind. Navigation collapses in glare. Landmarks become versions of themselves. The reduced map is the body's limit, not the country's. The story deserves an ending, not a treasure chest ending nuggets spilled across a table under a lantern, but an ending that respects the cost. Picture the last camp of a search season. The air cools, the last billy is poured. Someone says quietly that the terrain due east looks promising on a line that would match a certain phrasing, but they're out of days. Someone else promises to return earlier next year with a different rig, a new data set, a stronger case. A young pair of hands holds the old map, now ribbed with folds, soft as cloth, and sees not just a route but a lineage of roots. A wind moves up the creek bed and out across the flats, making the spinifex shiver. In that wind there is the oldest lesson of this place. The desert gives what it gives. It keeps what it keeps. People do the rest, naming, hoping, arguing, walking, returning. The forgotten mind lives best where story and stone meet, a legend soldered to a landscape that can carry its weight. Perhaps the reef exists, folded into the faulted ribs of country that only yields to the patient. Perhaps it doesn't, and the only gold here is the hour struck. light on quartz that goes cold as soon as the sun drops. Either way, the search has made its own kind of fortune. It has given language 2 hard years, meaning 2 hard miles, and a spine to the idea that even in a mapped world there are places where the next ridge can still change everything. The reef, if it is real, will one day be cored and measured and written in the neutral voice that money prefers. If it is not, it will keep being told in the voice that keeps people awake at night, low, certain, unafraid to say what cannot be proved. When the last campfire sinks 2 coals, the rangers hold their breath. Dawn will redraw the map, tracks will crease old dunes. Someone will quote a line committed to heart and lay a finger on a new place to begin, and the land, patient as ever, will wait, keeping its counsel, letting the wind do the talking over stone that remembers more than it reveals.
Don't just watch, join the family. Hit that subscribe button, turn on the bell, and be the first to dive into our latest stories every week. If you love what you see, drop a like, share with friends, and let me know your thoughts in the comments. Your support keeps this channel alive. Share your stories. Your story570@gmail.com.